The Jacksonville Jaguars head north this week to face their AFC South division rival Indianapolis Colts. BETDAQ currently has the Colts installed as a 3-point favorite in this game, 41.5 the total. Indianapolis coming off the first win of the Andrew Luck era. They beat the Minnesota Vikings last week. Coincidentally, Jacksonville lost to that same Vikings team in week 1 in overtime. Really, the Jaguars in that game, Blaine Gabbert, their young quarterback, played the best game of his career. It looked like the Jags had come back and won that game. Gabbert led them down the field for what appeared to be a game-winning touchdown at the time. However, Minnesota in the last 30 seconds of the game was able to get into position for a game-tying 55-yard field goal, and the Vikings ended up winning that game in overtime. Still, I think the Jags left that game with a lot of good feelings, their fans, a lot of good feelings about that offense in particular, because that offense has been the big problem in Jacksonville. Their defense last year was 6th in the league in total defense, but the offense was the worst offense in the entire league, 32nd out of 32 teams, and that really is all the passing game, because they had the leading rusher in the league. Maurice Jones-Drew led the league in rushing, yet they still finished with the worst offense in the league. A hard feat to accomplish, but Blaine Gabbert, their quarterback, was the worst starting quarterback in the entire league last year. They had a bad receiving core. Now they've upgraded that receiving core. They drafted Justin Blackmon out of Oklahoma State. Blackmon, a slow start to the season through these first couple of games, but Laurent Robinson, their free agent acquisition, is their leading wide receiver through 2 games. However, Blaine Gabbert reverted to form in the last game. After maybe playing the best game of his career in week 1 against Minnesota, he looked as bad as ever last week, passed for 52 yards. The Jags gained a total of 117 yards of offense last week against the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, if you're Jacksonville, this is a franchise that has struggled to sell tickets. They cover up the seats with tarps. And I talked to somebody who's at that game last week. There was a downpour towards the end of the first half. And he said to me, of course I left at halftime. He said, I was soaking wet. And the display of football I was watching, he said it was just nauseating. And if you saw that game, if you're a Jaguars fan, that was nauseating. I mean, what is going on there? All the optimism created by the new coaching hires this offseason. Mike Mularkey, of course, a new head coach in Jacksonville, an entirely new offensive staff, the drafting of Justin Blackmon I mentioned. And all that optimism really peaked, I guess, in that first game against the Minnesota Vikings, where fans saw a glimpse of what Jaguars management, the front office, what they thought Blaine Gabbert and this offense could be. But those fans were brought back to that harsh reality last week. This Jaguars offense once again now ranked last in the league, the spot they occupied at the end of last season. Now the Colts defense is not too good, so the Jaguars should be able to do some things this week similar to how they did against the Minnesota Vikings. But Andrew Luck, an Indianapolis quarterback, I know he's only played 2 games thus far in his pro career, but very impressed with this guy to start off. Now, I know he turned it over a little bit in the week 1 game against the Chicago Bears, but still, Luck has all the tools. You can see why he was ranked number 1, or you can see why he was the number 1 pick in the draft this past April, while a lot of people thought he was the best quarterback to come into the league in 20 or 30 years, maybe since Peyton Manning or even since John Elway. And this Indianapolis offense has been better than I expected through the first 2 weeks. They're clearly improved. Even though Luck is a rookie, he's clearly better than what they were doing at quarterback last year with Curtis Painter and Dan Orlovsky. The Jags defense has been a little disappointing through the first 2 weeks of the season. We mentioned 6th in the league last year in total defense. Everybody back. They were expected to be the strength of the team this year. Now they have gone through some injuries, starting cornerback Derek Cox, starting linebacker Darrell Smith. These guys have missed games. That's hurt them, no doubt about it. But still, it's a little head-scratching, a little troubling, I'm sure, to Jaguars coaches and fans how bad this defense has been through the first 2 weeks of the season. We'll see if they can turn it around this week. I do expect that Jaguars defense to play better this week. However, I do lean towards Indianapolis -3 here. I mean, I won betting against the Jags last week. I think people maybe got a little ahead of themselves after watching this team play Minnesota in week 1. Remember, the Vikings had an atrocious secondary last year. They didn't look very good last week, week 2, either against these Colts. So could have more to do with that Minnesota defense being bad, more so than the Jaguars offense really making strides. I do think the Jaguars offense we saw last week is more the reality, is the way it's going to be. Now, they're not going to gain 117 total yards again, mainly because the Indianapolis defense is a lot worse than Houston. But I do think Indianapolis wins 2 in a row here in the Andrew Luck era. I do like them to beat Jacksonville at home. Again, Indianapolis is a 3-point favorite in this game, 41.5 the total on BETDAQ. Not sure I'm going to have a play on the game. These are 2 bad teams. Seems like there's better opportunities out there, better value in other games. Don't fully trust Indianapolis. Obviously, 2-14 last year, rookie quarterback. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I mentioned, I do expect them to lose again in this game. So I'm going to stay away, but if you're going to have a play on this game, I do recommend backing Indianapolis, laying those 3 points at home.